the federal government will be conducting a national test of the emergency alert system.
Does that make you feel safe?
You cannot avoid it by flipping the channel. It's everywhere.
Does it make you feel safe that the government has spent 40 years studying this soap?
Are your savings safer because of these two congressmen? And do we need government to protect workers?
Of course.
Absolutely. Sure do. Next question.
Makes sense. Except one result is this. Government's good intentions gone wrong. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Politicians claim they make our lives better by passing laws. I assume they have good intentions, but we shouldn't judge anything by its intentions. And usually politicians' good intentions go wrong. Tonight we start with workplace regulations. Companies are greedy. They just want to make a buck. They don't care about their workers, so it does seem reasonable that government has to protect workers. Most everyone we asked agreed with that.
They should be protected.
I think we definitely do. There's so many things that could happen in a workplace, and you have so many corporations that could be corrupt. So I think the government should step in and help out workers.
That makes sense to people. There's so much that's beyond the workers' control. Safety rules, for example. What does the factory owner care if his workers are injured on the job? That's why we need OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It sets safety rules for factories. OSHA's fond of showing people this graph of how workplace deaths dropped since the beginning of OSHA. Workplace injuries have dropped at about the same rate. Thank goodness for government. Except, look at this graph. Look at what happens when you go back a few years. Oops, workplace deaths were dropping even before OSHA, dropping just as fast. Government's like someone who gets in front of a parade and pretends it led the parade. In a free society, things get better on their own without government. But people don't get that. They don't get that in European countries where people are rioting because they're upset about high unemployment. Don't they realize that those beloved worker protections are a reason companies don't want to hire? No, they don't get that, says Ann Jolis. She's a Wall Street Journal reporter who reports on Europe's work rules, and she joins us from London. So, Ann, what do workers get in Europe that we don't get?
Well, for starters, European workers have the right and the protection to gainful unemployment. So the minimum guaranteed annual vacation here in Europe, not including national holidays, is 20 days of paid vacation a year, not including national holidays, weekends, additional time off. In some countries, it's much higher. In France, it starts at 25 guaranteed days off. This summer, the European Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the EU, added on another one. It gave workers the right to a vacation do-over or give back. So that means that if you get sick during your...
What possibly can that be?
Well, that means that, for instance, say you're skiing for 2 weeks for your Christmas holidays, and you sprain your ankle, and you spend the last 8 days of your vacation laid up with a sprained ankle. That means that those 8 days automatically go into your sick leave, which is pretty much unlimited, and then you get a vacation do-over. You have the right to 8 extra days of paid vacation that year to make up for the 8 days that you spent ill on your vacation. So anytime you take a vacation and you get sick, you get to do those days over of your vacation again.
And if you just say, oh, I had a cold, I had the flu, they have to give you that back somewhere else?
If you've got a doctor's note, and it's not too hard usually to be able to pay a doctor to give you a doctor's note and say, oh, she got the sniffles when she was snorkeling, so she's going to need another 7 days of paid vacation. Let's
break it down by country. Let's do Italy first. In Italy, if you start a business, then if you keep it small, up to 10 workers, you have some flexibility. But if you hire an 11th employee, you must submit an annual self-assessment to the national authorities outlining every possible health and safety hazard.
Yes, and we're not just talking about, how you're going to deal with workers moving heavy machinery. Your self-assessment must also include how you're going to deal with specific stresses related to perhaps your age or your gender. It has to include the name of the doctor who came and performed the assessment, and it helps explain why the overwhelming majority of Italian workers work at companies with 10 or fewer employees.
If you hire a 16th employee, you are required to have union representatives, each of whom is entitled to paid leave to fulfill union duties.
At least 8 hours a month, yeah.
If you hire one more employee, he must be disabled?
Right. Once you get to your 16th worker, the next employee you hire must be disabled in some way, or else you pay a fine.
At the 51st employee, 7% of the payroll must be handicapped in some way.
Yes, by the time you get to 51 employees, 7% of your workforce must qualify as disabled in some way. And by the way, rates of disability here in Europe, pretty high.
So there's more. It goes, if you have 101 employees, even more rules. Let's touch on Spain. Spain has reformed its stupid work rules. And reform means that companies that fire people no longer have to pay 42 months severance pay. Now it's just 24 months. But that's still 2 years.
So every employee you hire, if they turn out badly, you're going to owe that employee up to 2 years' salary if you ever do want to dismiss him.
So in the past, someone making $100,000 a year was entitled to $350,000 in severance pay, but under the new rules, just $200,000. Why hire someone if you have to pay that much to fire them?
That's a very good question. You better be really sure you want them. And as we see by Spanish unemployment rates, which are roughly a quarter of Spaniards are officially unemployed, and about half of their youth workers are unemployed, it's a decision that not a lot of employers are willing to make.
You cover Europe. These rules are all over the place. I assume lots of people cheat.
Lots of people cheat. It's not, people are in a lot of these countries are expected to cheat, and cheating is what keeps the inspector in business. And in a lot of these countries, for a lot of different types of economic activity, it is easier and cheaper to bribe the inspector than to actually go through all the motions and try and follow all the rules and pay all the taxes and declare all your income, declare all your workers.
So by contrast, Singapore has a booming economy. They do things right. No minimum wage, no laws against discrimination. If you fire, just 4 weeks termination notice. The unemployment rate there is less than 2%.
And the proof seems to be in the pudding. This is a place where you can go, you can start a business, you can hire, you can be flexible enough to fire if you need to, and that makes it attractive.
Thank you, Ann Jolis. And thank God we don't have all those dumb laws in America, though we have plenty and we're getting more. And most people we ask want more rules, like guaranteed vacation.
We all need a vacation if we're working every day.
Absolutely, and I think more so. We work too hard in this country. In France, Italy, elsewhere, 6 weeks is norm.
But while America doesn't have mandatory vacation yet, we do have all these laws, 170,000 pages of federal rules that you must obey. And they keep passing more. Look at this chart. It shows how America has recovered from every recession since the Great Depression. A fast recovery in every one except for the red line. That's the current recovery, or non-recovery, I should say. I got this graph from economist Dan Mitchell of the Cato Institute. Dan, this recovery is slower partly because of all these rules?
You add up all the regulations and red tape, all the government spending, all the tax increases we're about to get, you can understand why entrepreneurs are thinking, well, maybe I don't want to hire people. And if I do hire them, it's sort of like the mess in Europe where, well, maybe I want to make sure I keep my company small. I don't want to give them health insurance because then I'm stuck with all the Obamacare mandates. I worry that we are becoming like Europe at exactly the same moment we're seeing that model fall apart.
And in the past, we had horrible recessions. And we had many of these laws, but not as many. And that allowed the animal spirits of entrepreneurs to make a difference.
As much as I would like a deregulated, laissez-faire economy, you don't need that. You just need to make sure that you have enough breathing room for the private economy to prosper. But over time, if government keeps growing faster than the private sector, That wedge basically means that the burden of government as a share of GDP is rising, and sooner or later, it's not like there's a magic tipping point where one straw on the camel's back causes it to collapse.
But there is a tipping point.
But there is a tipping point, and we are seeing it. Now, does that mean that we're 5 years away from being Greece, 20 years? I don't know. If I knew, I'd be rich. I'd be on Wall Street or something. But I know that the trend line is very bad. It happened under Bush, a Republican. It's happening under Obama, a Democrat. It doesn't work.
Let's talk about some of these good intentions that go bad. Clean energy.
Solyndra. It's like a word association game. And you look at Solyndra, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just one
example.
Well, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We've had dozens of these companies go bad, but it's really the story behind the story where it turns out that these are big campaign contributors. They're then getting these interest-free loans and forgiven loans from the government. You're distorting capital in the economy. What does that mean? It sounds like a boring economic term. It basically means that resources are being used less productively, which means we get less growth, which means workers get lower wages. It adds up to a bad situation.
We've got laws that encourage home ownership. President Bush says if you own a home, you have an ownership society, you take care of things, it's good for the economy.
Where you then create a housing bubble that blows up. So the very people who were supposed to be helped, homeowners, often were the ones that were sort of lured into walking out on the plank, and then, of course, the plank collapsed. We all fall into the shark-infested waters.
We have these tax credits, which are supposed to direct our spending to good things.
It sounds great, but from a tiny little tax code in 1913, only 2 pages long, 14 pages of law, we've now morphed into this 72,000-page monster. If you go to the IRS website, there's more than 1,000 different forms and regulations and things like that you can download. Nobody understands it at all. It's a boon to CPAs. H&R Block, I'm sure, loves it, but it's definitely a big millstone around the neck of the American economy. But every single one of those 72,000 pages has something in it that probably sounds good. But look what it adds up to.
And lastly, on the spending. The machinery of the welfare state. Everyone in the street we asked said you got to take care of people, and we all want to help people. Unintended consequence?
What worries me about the welfare state is this is where you're hurting people who are most vulnerable. Because the welfare state, when you look at the dozens of programs that comprise the welfare state, it becomes like flypaper. It holds people down. There are some shocking figures showing that as your income rises, you're trying to make yourself better off. You're doing the right thing. You're trying to live the American dream. As you earn more income, you start getting taxed on one end, and then the government's taking away all these benefits on the other end. So you have lower income people who are trying to get better off who actually lose living standards. They have less disposable income if they get $10,000 more in salary. It's amazing.
Because they pay more in taxes being in this higher bracket, and they lose government benefits.
They lose government benefits, whether it's food stamps, whether it's earned income credit, whether it's welfare benefits, whether it's Medicaid eligibility, whether it's housing assistance. You're like on a treadmill, but you're not even running hard to keep where you are. You're running harder and harder, and the treadmill's going backwards. And think about the message that sends to the very people we want to help. It discourages them. They decide, well, heck, I'm just going to try to get on disability, or I'm just not going to work as hard.
In Pennsylvania, you mentioned, if you had $29,000 of income, you're better off staying there than earning $55,000?
I hope this was an exception, not the rule. In effect, you are told don't earn more because you lose the safety net. Well, maybe if the safety net wasn't luring people into disincentives, we wouldn't have the big problem we have today.
Good intentions going bad. Thank you, Dan Mitchell. Coming up, you probably heard this annoying alert before.
The federal government will be conducting a national test of the emergency alert system.
Government spends your money, but it doesn't protect you. That's next.
A nationwide test set to begin any moment.
Ooh, that's exciting. A nationwide test.
Remember, you cannot avoid it by flipping the channel. It's everywhere.
If it's everywhere, it must be something from our federal government. And sure enough, it is. It's the emergency alert system. It started in 1951 with Conelrad, a warning system to alert us if the Russians attacked. They didn't, fortunately. And then under President Bush Sr., we got IPAWS, the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. We were told the president could now reach the American public in just 10 minutes. Then taxpayers were billed again, another $100 million for CMAS, the Commercial Mobile Alert System, so government can reach you on your cell phone. And people like this. They say, thank goodness government does that.
Yeah, definitely, of course.
Spread the word when something is happening.
I mean, how else are we going to find out what's going on?
Well, I'll get to that, but the general attitude is, yippee, we're safer thanks to the emergency alert system. Except, have you ever been warned about anything by the government, that is? You often get warnings from us and from radio stations and word of mouth and Twitter and so forth about storms or other threats. But the emergency alert system? No, never. Even on September 11th, when we were attacked, the system was not activated. Although it existed for 60-plus years, it wasn't even tested until Jamie Barnett said, gee, you think we ought to test this thing? And at the time, you were the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau chief. You found out it had never even been tested.
John, I was amazed to find out that we had this system. It was part of our national preparedness. It had never been tested. And coming from the Navy, as I did, we know that you don't expect what you don't inspect. So I wrote a memo. The chairman, Janikowski, sent it over to the White House, and that resulted in the test on November 9th, 2011.
And we have heard over time these tests coming through from our local TV stations, but that just may be the local station just testing it on its own.
That's right. And that actually was where the fallacy was, because I assumed when I came into the FCC that meant the whole system was being tested.
But the tests did happen, and successful?
I do think it was successful. We knew that after 60 years, we would be able to come up with some things that didn't connect the way they should. That's what we actually were looking for. About 90% of the primary entry point stations were able to receive the signal and retransmit it, which is what was supposed to happen.
How can you call it successful if it only got to 90% of the main stations?
Well, because it was, in fact, to test where the problems were. And to have 90% was not the success. We weren't looking for 100%. We were looking for what are the problems.
You call that successful, but this must be some government definition of success, because in the private sector, I think that's what we call a failure. Your nationwide test did happen in 2011.
The federal government will be conducting a national test of the emergency alert system.
But it didn't go nationwide.
The disaster warning system is supposed to be carried on radio and television. 2 p.m. Eastern hit a few snags, to say the least.
But Fox News viewers heard nothing. And some people heard this murky announcement.
Had this been an actual emergency, the attention signal you just heard.
DirecTV cable viewers reported hearing Lady Gaga's song Paparazzi play during the test.
So how is that a success if you're hearing Lady Gaga music?
You know, my wife is a school teacher, and 90% on a test gets an A in her class. But I'll say this. We knew that there would be problems.
Good enough for government work.
We knew that there would be problems, and that's actually what we wanted to identify. And God loved the people who put Lady Gaga on. That was actually another rule that says you're not supposed to have dead air time. And because of a feedback problem on one of the satellite networks, he actually punched in. We got to put some music on there. Lady Gaga was the benefactor of that.
So why do we need this thing? I don't need to know that the president is in charge. I need to know what to do. And I've got a million local media that will tell me.
You know, but you can't do it instantly all over the country the way that you can with the emergency alerting system. So the alerting system is not supposed to be follow-on information so much. That's something that I think is a legitimate local news, national news type of function. But look at the earthquake that we had in a couple of years ago in the Mid-Atlantic region, rocketed up and down the East Coast. That was not much damage. But what if it had been? What if it wiped out New York and Washington at the same time? This is a system that's designed to work even when nothing else does. So a lot of your stations would have been knocked off the air, except for these, which have been hard.
But how would I have learned about it? You learn about it from your radio and TV stations.
That's
if
right.
They're off the air, I wouldn't learn about it. If they're on the air, I'm learning about it now because we're in the news business.
Actually, I have a battery-operated radio. People have their cars. That's one of the things about it. So this.
But I learned on the battery-operated radio, and Anchorman says this happened. We're giving you the news as soon as we get it.
And I appreciate
this is a
that.
boondoggle, hundreds of millions of dollars. The government must do that, and once it's spent, you guys never stop.
This is a great public-private partnership to make sure that our public remains safe.
During Hurricane Sandy here in this area, 12 hours after the storm began, people in my house got this emergency alert on their cell phone. It looked like this, and it said, "Take shelter now." But this was 12 hours into the storm. This is the stupidity of government. And I realize you've left government now, so I'm not personally directing this at you. But you've spent much of your life in government, and this is foolish government thinking, spend the money for second-rate stuff.
So here's the thing. You just mentioned what is a local alert, not the national alert system. It is the CMAS system. And one of the things that we have to include in this is training both for our emergency workers and for the people who initiate these warnings. So you're right. 12 hours is not acceptable. That was a failure of someone. But I want to say is you still want to be able to have that alerting system. I appreciated the fact that I got an alert before the derecho that said take cover.
Well, more training. That'll mean more money. Thank you, Jamie Barnett. Coming up, my government promises to protect me from dangerous chemicals. So for 40 years, they've studied whether it's dangerous to wash your hands with this soap or brush with this toothpaste. And their conclusion after 40 years? You'll be amazed. But school is boring. No, it's not! Those are students at a charter school. Charters are public schools that are free of the rules and bureaucracy of regular government schools. Some charters have used that freedom to do a much better job. Kids at that Harlem school get high test scores, and the school makes learning fun.
Reading is work, but it's rockin' awesome.
Rockin' awesome? And these kids say school is fun?
Yes.
How is it fun to learn?
They just teach us in a fun way.
So you guys look forward to going to school in the morning?
Yes.
Regular government schools rarely get results like that because they're a government monopoly, and government monopolies almost always do a lousy job. People who try to reform them run up against what's called the education blob. It's this Jabba the Hutt-like thing that can't be budged. It's the teachers' union, the janitors' union, politicians and bureaucrats. They resist change. And that's why I was excited when the charter school movement began. Finally, some schools would get to experiment, and good experiments would expand. Parents would see how much better a school could be, and kids would finally benefit from the innovation we see in the rest of America. But it's not happening. Well, it happens sometimes. We saw that one school. But Jeannie Allen from the Center for Education Reform says the charter movement has gone wrong, too. And what's happening to Tracy Williams is an example of that. So what happened to you?
My group and I have put together an application to start a charter school in Montclair, New Jersey, and we've been repeatedly stonewalled.
You wanted to do this because of your own daughter's experience. She had bad teachers, but with a good teacher, you got together with people and said, what are the rules? We'll start a charter.
Yes.
The first application was 100 pages.
Yes.
Denied. Did they tell you why?
At that time, they said that there really wasn't a need for a charter school, that we had typographical errors in the application.
There wasn't a need for the charter school. Wouldn't McDonald's like to say that to Burger King? There's no need for competition here.
Yes.
All right, you had errors in the application. Well, then you try it again. You fix that.
Yes, we fixed the errors. We got more people involved. They said we needed to get more people involved. They said we needed to show more parent support. The first application we put it in with 70 letters, and the second application we put it in with 125 letters from parents who were interested in the school.
Still denied.
Still denied.
6 times you've been denied. And Jeannie, this is typical.
It's becoming more and more typical, unfortunately. You know, we've got to remember that the whole purpose of the charter school movement was to create new public schools, open by choice, held accountable for results, but free from most of those rules and regulations. And while the bar to entry should be very, very high, the reality is government is encroaching every day on people who want to start schools like Tracy and people who have schools.
because it's the blob, it's still the education blob in charge, and they don't want the competition?
That's exactly right. And the state education departments get into the processes, even the best charter school law states. We have one of the highest performing charter schools in Arizona. The director spends 30% of her time in this monstrous database filling out paperwork that they're trying to actually squeeze her individual charter school into a district-like box. They ask her to report about her improvement plan. Well, she's got one of the highest performing schools in the state, and she's got to come up with an improvement plan. For what?
And they're all trying to make sure the kids are protected.
They're trying to make sure the kids are protected. But in Tracy's case, are all the kids in New Jersey reading at grade level? No. Are they all doing math? No. And here you have qualified founders, people who have worked hard and recognize it's something they want to do, and yet we're saying, no, don't come in. This is a movement that's beginning to have some pieces of the government it tried to get away from.
Now, I've experienced the bureaucrats' resistance myself. After I did my first 2020 show on education choice, hundreds of union teachers showed up outside my office screaming, "Shame on you, Stossel." Then they demanded that I try teaching.
So just teach for a week. We got high schools, we got elementary schools.
The crowd liked the idea of me teaching for a week.
Teach, teach, teach.
So I surprised them and by saying, sure, I'll teach for a week. I was ready. But then the blob did its thing. It wouldn't even let that happen. After endless meetings, they decided, no, Stossel shouldn't teach for a week. It's like they've embraced the Soviet bureaucracy and they don't care about the kids. They just care about their turf.
I can't imagine why they stop a school like Tracy's from opening up. I can't imagine why the existing charter schools in places from New Jersey to Louisiana to Florida, Arizona, and even Washington, D.C.
Well, speculate. You're in this business fighting them.
Because they're so afraid. Even the charter school movement is so afraid to make any mistakes. It fears risk, right? Because they're afraid that if they don't show themselves to be the very, very best, then they will no longer be in business. But the reality is, risk is in every great innovative business. It's what makes America tick. And so while you want high quality, you want to take a risk on somebody like Tracy who wants to start a school.
You're going to keep trying?
We are going to keep trying. We have an appeal out on a 5th application, so we're going to keep trying.
Well, good luck to you. Thank you, Tracy Williams and Jeannie Allen. Next, do you use any of these products? Put this under your arms, clean with this, brush your teeth with this stuff? There's something in these that some people say a chemical in here might hurt you. So government's studying it. And what have they found? I'll tell you when we return. People want government to keep us safe, protect the water we drink, the air we breathe, the soap we use. Wait, soap? Well, yes. In the name of protecting us, our government has studied the ingredients in these antibacterial soaps and these other products. Underarm deodorant has this chemical. It's called triclosan. It kills germs. It's in lots of products. Total toothpaste. The bureaucrats are studying it to make sure triclosan's safe and effective. And that's a good intention. So how have they gone wrong? Well, they've been studying it now, forget this, 40 years. And they still haven't made a decision. Paul Alexander wrote a book about fighting germs called Pandemic, the story of people versus germs. So 40 years? What are they doing?
Well, the product was invented in the late 60s, and in the early 70s, they started a review process. And the FDA decided that it was safe, but they were not sure that it was effective. And then the EPA is also involved in regulating the substance. They decided it was effective, but they weren't sure that it was safe. And so this started 40 years ago. They all go off and do their research and submit the papers.
And we pay for it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And there are always some environmental group, maybe populated by nuts, that says...
It's gone on for so long that then the environmental groups came in and started protesting, claiming that this substance was harmful, potentially dangerous. Now,
and as always, they have research to back this up. They feed huge amounts to rats.
Right. And then the rats, sexual organs will grow too large.
Rat testicles grew large. Okay.
Yes, that was one study. They'll give it to sheep, and it'll affect the estrogen level of sheep. They tend not to do studies on humans who are actually using the product. But it's gone on for so long that they got involved, and now they're getting Congress involved.
And the EPA scared people by labeling the chemical a pesticide.
Yeah, what's interesting is
there's a pesticide in here. I use this stuff. There's a pesticide in here?
Well, it's actually good for gingivitis if you do this.
It kills bacteria. Yeah. That's why they call it a pest. It kills a pest, which is bacteria.
At the EPA, bacteria, which is just a germ, that's a fancy word for a germ, it's considered a pest. So if you kill a pest, you're a pesticide. So you have all these images of DDT and
Johnson & Johnson stopped using the product, and because
they don't have
despite an extensive history of safe use, we want you to have peace of mind.
Well, I mean, that may be what they say publicly. Privately, if you talk to them, business is based on being able to predict what's going to happen in the future. So what happens if the EPA finally, after 40 years, or the FDA finally, after 40 years, makes a decision and it goes against them? So it's, in terms of just planning, business planning, it makes sense to assume after 40 years, they may never make a decision. And if they do make a decision, it may not be in their favor. And the tragedy is that, that from what I can tell, all that I've read and talked to people about, it's a safe product that, like you said, it's in your toothpaste. I use it too. It's in your dial hand soap, your antibacterial dial hand
Your
soap.
tax dollars at work for 40 years. Thank you, Paul Alexander. Up next, more horrible examples of government's good intentions, probably, gone wrong. Here's one. You have to obey this. Thank you very much. Good intentions gone wrong. That's what this thing is. This is the Dodd-Frank law. Hundreds of pages that are supposed to protect us from those evil banks that the politicians say the banks took needless risks on mortgages because there had been deregulation.
The cause is reckless deregulation. If we do not act, a bad situation will become worse, and that's why we are determined to get this bill through.
And they got it through, all 848 pages. I haven't read it, I admit that. But Louise Bennett has. She's a lawyer who specializes in garbage like this bill. So this is going to protect us. What's the problem?
The problem is a lot of the myths surrounding this. And one of the biggest is that deregulation, that we've had sort of a 20-year period of deregulation, which has led to this financial...
George Bush was this big deregulator, I'm told.
And it started even earlier. People say Reagan and throughout the Clinton era.
I was astonished to learn George W. Bush hired 86,000 more regulators. This guy who's portrayed as the deregulator.
That's right. And banking, of course, is one of the most regulated industries, if not the most regulated industry. And the problem was not deregulation here. The problem was that we had a crisis caused by a massive industry-wide misinvestment in real estate. And that was a direct result of government policies, not of deregulation.
A bubble. Everybody was encouraged to take out a mortgage.
That's right.
All right. But I assume these guys are well-intended. They craft this bill. Logic says this will protect us.
Well, the problem is bailouts need to be addressed, and Dodd-Frank does not end bailouts. It does not end too big to fail.
What, all this? And that's the worst part, I agree. That is left in here. And in fact, it's even encouraged because it implies that some banks will be bailed out.
That's right. When you say a bank is systemic, which is the terminology, you're basically saying this is an institution that is too big, too important, and too critical to the U.S. economy to allow to be left to the market.
So they've labeled some of these big institutions systemic, and then look at this chart. It shows what happens and why it increases the risk of too big to fail. The big banks get to borrow money more cheaply because people figure government will bail them out?
Creditors know that those banks are not going to be bailed out if they fail, and so they're more likely to give their money at a cheaper rate to a large institution.
So to borrow $1,000, JP Morgan Chase pays $4 interest, but a small bank pays $7.50. That puts them at a disadvantage. They stay small. The big banks grow bigger.
That's right. The larger you are, the more likely you are to be bailed out because you're systemic and because they cannot allow you to fail.
And then you can make more money. And the rest of this bill, when it doesn't stop too big to fail, it does other terrible things, though well-intended?
The act is just a mandate. I think something people need to realize about this is Dodd-Frank was passed, and as you pointed out, it's 800-900 pages, but it's just a mandate. It basically says to regulatory agencies, you need to go out and make rules on a variety of topics. And
so this isn't the rule.
These are the rules.
Go write 400 new rules.
Go write 400 new rules, and we've only had 1/3 of the rules, so there's about 400 rulemaking requirements. Of those, 1/3 have been finalized. Many of them are not yet in force yet, but they've been finalized. 1/3 have been proposed, which means they're in various stages of being reviewed, and 1/3 have yet to be proposed. And so we've only seen, a small segment of the rulemaking that will occur under Dodd-Frank. But
and what's the harm in that? What does that do?
Well, one of the difficulties is firstly the complexity. I mean, to just keep up with these regulations, no single person could possibly do it, and it requires, huge numbers of manpower hours for each institution to kind of keep up with this.
24 million hours of private sector labor each year just for the rules they've passed so far.
Well, yeah, that's approximately based on about 200 of the rules. So 400, you could probably double that.
So no wonder the economy doesn't recover with this hanging over our heads.
If they were rules that people could identify with, understand, and apply, that would be one thing. But what we're seeing with a lot of the regulators is that they're putting out rules saying, well, we're basically going to do whatever we want. We have open discretion. This may be how we approach it, but we have discretion to do whatever we want. So rules are passed, and we still don't know exactly what they will do.
We'll decide later if you're breaking the law?
That's pretty much the subtext of it.
And so business slows. Good intentions gone bad. Thank you, Louise Bennett of the Cato Institute. Coming up, my take on government gone wrong and a little bit of good news. Our show title tonight, Good Intentions Gone Wrong, describes most of what government does. We have problems. Politicians then claim they have a fix, so they pass laws. They add to this growing pile of laws, 170,000 pages already. They propose 1,000 new ones every week. At the bill signings, everyone feels good. And the public seems to buy it. They think a problem was solved. After all, no kids visiting Washington ask their congressman, what laws did you repeal? It's always, Congressman, what laws have you passed? And so they pass, and these laws pile up. And for every one of these, there's an unintended consequence, or several. The track record is clear. Central planners failed in the Soviet Union, in Cuba, in America's public school system, at the post office. Central planning stops innovation, distorts the economy. Yet for all that failure, whenever another crisis hits, the natural instinct is to say, government must do something. Why don't we learn? Because there are always problems that must be solved, and there are always politicians who claim to be problem solvers. And they're so interested in our welfare. It's all they talk about. Some even went to Harvard, so they must be so smart. And we believe them then when they say, yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
But real life shows they can't do things as well as free people. That's why I say, no, they can't. Yes, they can pass a law, but the law doesn't really solve the problem. It creates new ones. In my city last week, there were protests in front of McDonald's. Unions want fast food workers paid more. The New York Times put this protester on its front page. She says McDonald's pays her $8 an hour, but she deserves $15. And so civil rights groups and a union demand a higher living wage, and they may get it.
Mighty, mighty union! The mighty, mighty union! Big bad union! The big bad union!
Yeah, well, the big bad union, like the big bad wolf, and government use force. If 51% of voters or union members want a $15 minimum, that's what employers must pay. And that sounds good to people. Everyone will get a raise. The problem comes from what is not seen. I can interview the guy who got a raise. I can't interview the guy who decided not to open a McDonald's because work rules were too onerous. I can't interview the worker who was never offered a job because high union pay scales protected him out of a job. We usually don't even know who those people are. They are the unseen victims of government's protections. It's frustrating to try to explain the unseen. Sometimes I fear no one understands, so it's a relief to meet the few people who do.
I believe that government is here to fix our streets and our roads and protect us, but they don't need to protect the people from their jobs.
Well, 3 cheers for her. And for you at home who actually pay attention and understand that it's freedom, not central planning, that gives us better lives. That's our show. Thanks for watching. I'm John Stossel.